Alright, I think I am back live. I might have been live for longer than I realized. Just sitting there doing nothing. But, yeah, whatever. Sorry to the folks on the YouTube. Let me move some stuff around. I want to put the laptop up here now that it's charged so I can, watch the chat more immediately. Or at least not miss large portions a lot. Because I'm pretty sure I missed some pretty good stuff in the last part of the stream. So, what to do next? Well, really, the next thing is I want to spend a little more time putting in some real tests that do something interesting. We stopped at this before, which is neat. And I want to just expand on this, make sure I can fully express everything with this system before I go ahead and start trying to drive it from data. I have a question. Oh, I can't read it. I wonder if I can switch to non-dark mode. There we go. Cache Override asks, are you going to rewrite the engine? I am in the process of rewriting the core 4coder engine. In fact, I have a separate branch. I'm not working on that today. But yeah, I don't have like virtual whitespace up yet, which is the next big thing I have to work on. But I did several iterations on a new version of the core engine that is set up to be more composable, so I can do more than just UTF-8 files. It's more it's possible to break it down at different stages so that I can handle large files in a smart way. It's set up to be parallelizable so that I can more easily, like, if say I'm loading a 10 megabyte file, it used to be that the only thing I could do to get a parallel advantage of that is to basically asynchronously load the file and, you know, process the 10 megabytes on a single core and then present it when it's ready. But the new system, it's actually possible to do all the operations on like a pipeline, so that you can have as many threads as you want. Well, it's got like 4 stages, so up to 4 threads doing some of the work simultaneously, even on just a single file. So, yeah, the point is it's coming along, but it's not ready yet. And I'm not going to stream much of that work until it's closer to done, just because I'd like to avoid giving any kind of impression about the timeline on it for a while, because I have no idea how much more experimentation I want to do. Alright, so here there we go. See if I can do that. I want to see if I can do one other quick thing real quick. Can I set my Mac to not go to sleep for a little while here? How do you do that? Energy saver. I'll tell it to turn the display off after 30 minutes so that it'll stay up. I'm still worried it's going to like automatically well, we'll see. I don't want it to go to sleep, and I can't see any sleep settings over here. Just Google it real quick. Okay, we're good then. So, let's try out this test real quick. Alright, sweet. So I can type stuff from the simulate key. I can type stuff. I want to be able to click. So let's do and really I ought to do a thing where I like initialize the mouse right here so that it's got some kind of actual position. Other question from Cash Override. What made you want to make these changes? So it got kind of complicated, like just, you know, stacking more and more features on top. So it could do all of the stuff you need to do to look positions and editing through the API. So global absolute positioning system on the buffer, the coordinate conversion stuff. You might not know what I'm talking about. I made a blog post about it. Go look at what I talked about, coordinate conversions and within buffers to understand exactly what I'm getting at there. But supporting all of that at the base, kind of, and then on top of that, you have to be able to color the text in the rendering path, so that's a little bit more complexity. You want to be able to do virtual white space and auto indents in my system, right? I want to have that stuff, so that affects how all the layout stuff works. Another layer of that, and then I added Unicode support with UTF-8 encoding in the buffers, and then that added an extra layer, and so that meant like you'd have code paths that were like 4 or 5 or 6 loops deep. They were really just an O of n loop, but it was like a loop over the UTF-8 that generates a little bit of Unicode, like a little bit of data in Unicode code points that you can then loop over those code points you just generated, and you know, lay them out, and then you can loop over the layout data to figure out where the cursor needs to be. And after all those loops, it's just all kind of, you write that code, it's all kind of compact together. The only way you could ever do something like decompose that so that it can support UTF-16 is, well, you could write a second one that's like, this does all the same things that one does, but it's UTF-16. And then if you ask the question like, well, what if I want a version that does do virtual whitespace and one that doesn't do a virtual whitespace? Well, I guess we're writing 2 more versions, one for the UTF-8 and UTF-16 versions of both of those, and then you could go, well, what if we convert everything to UTF-8? Well, yeah, that would solve that problem. Are you also going to always do UTF-8 decoding? Because sometimes you're going to want a binary buffer. Sometimes you're going to have a large enough buffer that even though it might be UTF-8, you're going to treat it in a way that allows you to avoid the cost of UTF-8 decoding. So, you know, if you have a gigabyte of Unicode or UTF-8, you maybe just say, you know what, the Unicode characters are rare, most of them are ASCII. Just show me those as like messed up bytes, and I don't care. I just want to be able to peruse most of the data quickly, and I don't want it to do all the UTF-8 stuff. So you turn that off. How are you going to support all of these different ways of combining features on and off? Well, you're definitely not going to end up writing every combination. What you would have to do is pass that data in, like pass in flags that are like, I want to control how I decode this way, I want to control how I lay things out this way, and you're passing that stuff down into one single implementation. But that's kind of nasty when you think about the fact that, I mean, how do you then compose, if I want to say, like, today I'm going to write a new decoder, a new layout type or something, you are not only writing the new layout thing, but then you're gluing it in with all that glue code that has the flags that allow you to call it, the actually like the switching on those flags that lets you call it, and so on. Really, it's much nicer if you can decompose it into stages. And so that's kind of what I decided to do, is do work to uncouple these things so that they're more easily composable. That's why I started the new engine. The other thing I wanted was a new API. So those two things, starting a new engine gave me an excuse to do a clean break, because I'm going to overhaul the internals anyway. It's going to take a while to get that up to a good level of quality and support all the things the old engine supported. While I'm at it, I'm going to be taking a break from releasing builds a lot. I might as well also do the API overhaul at that point. So those are the two things that made me decide it was time to do the new engine. All right. Let's put the mouse XY at, let's see, height 2010. And then, let's see. Now I'm going to simulate mouse click input. Key codes. I don't really want a key code for key mouse left, do I? I could. Key codes, types, mouse. Well, let me look at, instead of this, let me look at what the input up here gets filled with. Right, so we want to answer questions like, is the mouse out of the window or not? Press L, release L. Yeah, and so this is where things start to get a little interesting. Things that are marked transient here are generally things that I could compute if I just set the persistent things. So like if I just set L or R, I can figure out correctly whether press R or press L and stuff have happened. But then there's this question of, do I want to be robust again to malformed inputs? And I think I do. Speaking of which, why is that written that way? Okay. So I think I'm going to just say simulate mouse state instead of press. And then input.mouse. Alright. So we want to be able to answer the following questions. Out of window, L, press L, release L. Ah, shit. L, R, yes, yes, no, yes. Wheel, X, Y. Okay. Now, let me come over here. No, it's going to be in here. Out of window. Yeah, so why don't I just do it this way? This would be better. Alright, and then I suppose I should match that with this. And you can see how like getting it correct, you see I have to pair that up with this on the next frame if I want to just simulate a single press of the L and no hold. And this is one of those things where what I'm really going to want is a slightly higher level API, I think, that allows me to simulate that. So this is the lowest level where I set simulate mouse state. You know, I made a mistake. I shouldn't have started this stream yet. I should have done one other thing before I started. I'm going to put this stream on a break in a second and go take care of one other piece of business. But before I do that, what I was saying is, so this is the lowest level thing. We're actually going to put an API over this because unless I'm directly trying to simulate bad mouse input, I want to have a thing that automatically gets it correct, because there's a lot you could get wrong, and I don't want to necessarily store a data format that's like, here's the mouse state on every single frame, because that's going to be like, I'm going to be storing the same XY position over and over again. I'm going to be storing like a hold on the L, so it'll be state.L equals true for like 20 frames or something without changing. And I don't need to store all that. I really just kind of want to delta compress that, right, into just the changes that happen every frame and compute the mouse state every time from that. So it's a little bit more event-like as the keys are. In fact, that's something I've thought about. The keys and mouse, the keyboard and mouse handling on 4coder is in general a little inconsistent, because the mouse acts like a state and the keyboard acts like events. And I changed that a little bit towards more eventful, because the binding stuff really only can be triggered by events. So like there's the mouse key buttons are treated as key events for the purpose of triggering events, stuff like that. But anyway, we will look at that in a minute. So let me pull these up. So here's simulate key stuff. Let me put in simulate mouse XY. Input mouse.x equals x, mouse.y equals y. And oh, those aren't floats, are they? Okay. What are they? Stay right here, jerk. They're just normal signed ints. Okay. That was kind of stupid. Saved a little bit of typing. State input mouse equals, is this the same? Input. Yeah, it's the same. Cool. So cool. Alright. So in this mode, I think I'm going to need it to draw for me where it thinks the... I should probably have it click twice too, in this particular case. 127, 128. 8. So it'll do what I was hoping it would. Nice. And can I simulate? Alright, after this I gotta go take care of something else, and I'll put the stream on hold for a moment. Sorry to the YouTube folks. What was I gonna do here? Simulate key input, key back, modifier none. Alright, let's see. Oops. Cool. Alright. I will be right back. How should I leave you guys a message that says I'm coming back? Hello, people. Alright. So, so far, I can simulate key input, mouse input at a super low level. And, that cookie might have been a bad idea. And I think it's time to just take a look at that mouse problem next. Well, it's kind of bugging me that I haven't actually fixed this send exit signal thing, so I said I might as well get it done while we're here. But I don't think it's actually a good idea now. It's a bit off topic. So, right, so simulate state, was that what I called it? Mouse? Oh wait, I'm looking at it right here. Okay. So, the basic thing I want to be able to do is basically announce event-like things that modify the state, rather than just set the state, like wholesale set the state every time. So like, simulate mouse press, mouse left press, application step input, mouse dot L equals true, input mouse dot L press L equals true. And what we actually kind of need is like mouse XY mouse so how do I want to do this? I want to do this the other way around. Simulate mouse XY, come down here. I want to write it here first. So every frame, I start with an empty input thing here. I start filling it. I need somehow to have the previous frames I need the previous frame's mouse state. So I'll want to do something to get that, but for now I'll do this. And what we'll do is, before we pass anything, I'll grab mouse state. I think it's just mouse, right? Yeah. I'll grab that. There. And then I can set it here. Or really what I should be doing is simulate mouse update input previous mouse state. Alright, and then and this is where having it broken down into transient and persistent subsections is useful for the clear to zero, but we don't have that, so we're just going to clear zero all the stuff that's basically transient style stuff. Press and release information is transient. The wheel is transient. Okay. So, okay, that was a mistake. Let me adjust this way. So, that will be preserving the L and the R. Computer fan's being noisy right now. Don't like it when it does that. Yeah, it didn't used to make that sound. I don't think it's got a problem. Anyway, the X and Y is preserved because the mouse is only presumed to move when we send an update to the position. L and R is only presumed to change when we either press or release one of those. Out of window changes with the XY, and wheel just gets set whenever it's being whenever that's being used. Okay, so that moves our XY, and whenever we do that, Right, so that would let me simulate most situations correctly. I'm wondering if I... Okay, well, that will get us off the ground. Mouse dot. So I need to figure out how I'm going to pass in width and height here. Does anyone know where that information is? Size. WM size. Resize. Target.width, target.height. Okay. Okay. So if I have that set up correctly, then instead of all this work here, I should be able to set the X, Y once, and then mouse L left press, left release, and then left press again, and left release again. Yep. Cool. Okay, so I think that the basics of the API are figured out now. The next question is, well, let me see if I want to try to deal with these local persists in a smart way. Actually, there's a couple other things I might want to think about too. What about when I want to put in malformed mouse stuff? I'm going to be updating every time. Should I be able to turn the update off or clear the previous mouse state whenever I do a intentionally bad mouse input? Yeah, I feel like I want to be able to turn that off. So I could turn that off if I wanted. I won't play with that right now because I don't actually have any interest in testing bad mouse input yet. But all you'd have to do is have a call that's like enforce and unenforce, and if you switch to enforce, that you basically just say, okay, at the end of this step, I'm going to clear the mouse to 0, and then from then on, it will be correctly enforced. And similarly, when you unenforce it, you just switch it to not, so that it won't do the update next time. You don't change anything else. Something like this. I think that won't be too hard to work out, though. Cool. Kind of interested to see, does it handle all of this in one frame correctly, in order? I assume that it would. Suppose I did all of those. That's 5. I could even combine this in right here. Something didn't go right. Oh, did it apply the same modifier to all the keys? See, that's a bug. Yeah. Interesting. We found a bug. Alright, why does it do that? Yeah, totally doing a Control O instead of a non-Control O. So I want to sit close all documents. I want to sit right here on 4ed CPP. There's okay. Sure would be nice to have had that fixed. I don't remember how that's a hack or how I would have simplified it. Oh boy. I don't know. Had a bad habit of half doing everything. Even just a year ago. I was just barely starting to learn how to like buckle in and like get one full thing done rather than 2 half things. I probably even now don't fully understand how far to go to count a thing on one thing, and do I start another thing today and leave it half done or not, and how do I make those judgment calls? Because it feels like this is the kind of thing where I was just like not totally focused and wrote some crap that I knew was not quite right and didn't bother to totally deal with it, even when I should have, because I knew how I would do it later. I'm not sure. Like, this looks super stupid. Oh, I see. Yeah, that's what. That's. Type keyboard, get single key. Very unclear why I decided to do it this way. Key, get single key. There it is. Alright. Whoa. Alright, so that's not even the right spot. Because that's for the command coroutine if it's already been launched. This is, I'm looking for the first time I execute it, which is down up here. Yeah, this stuff shits the bed. Okay. Viviadelsky asks, what's a coroutine? I ask a counter question. Do you mean what's a coroutine in the general sense, or what's a coroutine in my codebase? Because those are both very long and time-consuming things to get all the way into, so I'd like to make sure I don't go off on the wrong direction here before I tell you my answer. Alright, in my codebase, a coroutine is a handle to a thread that has a locking mechanism that only allows it to one coroutine to run, and they're all on the main thread. So basically I have like threads that are for parallel execution. Then I have a pool of threads that are for sort of cooperative handoff of execution along the main thread. And so all a coroutine is just a thread with a mutex assigned to it that is used for the handoff between it and the main thread. And then it has some helpers around it to help you pass data in and out to the coroutine. But the primary purpose of it is to run commands. Basically all the user commands get run in the coroutine, not in the original main thread. And the reason for that is so that they can do things like get user input. Get user input is a call that yields from the current coroutine to the main thread and tells it, hey, this command is actually still running, but it's requesting that it input from the user. This is what is used to do things like searches. All that is powered by the coroutine system. Basically because you're running one command you're running one command and it wants input that it can only get by yielding to the main thread, which does the work of gathering input, and it'll have to wait for a few frames for this to happen. But we don't actually want to stop the flow of the command. We want right in the middle of the command to get this piece of data and keep going. And there's no way to write that without there's no way to write an API that allows for that kind of the flow to make sense in your custom code, and also that it lasts over multiple frames without it being in a separate thread at least. And a coroutine just makes it cleaner than having it in a separate thread that's kind of wild westing and could do anything. Like the possibilities are smaller if you implement your coroutine correctly. The possibilities for things to go wrong get a little bit smaller. Not a lot, but a little. I'm not sure that I like that decision. It might be one of the things I change when I switch to the new API. It's very hard to say. It has a lot of advantages, but it has a shit ton of disadvantages. And I think it's probably better to try to keep to a simpler control flow. Even if the code has to be more complicated to compute the thing, the control flow of the program in toto would be simplified in a way that I think would be best. CJM asks, didn't you implement Duff's device at one point? I think you mean, I called it a Duff's routine. It's a little bit like a Duff's device, except in a Duff's device you just use a switch without breaks to execute a certain number of instructions. It's kind of useful for like if you're trying to, I don't even know if it is a good idea anymore. At one point on some kind of machine somewhere in history it made sense for doing things like writing 8 bytes at a time until you get to the last 8 bytes, or the last, the last chunk that can't be written in 8 bytes because it's some number less than 8. Then you jump into a switch statement where there's enough single byte statements to do exactly the right number of outputs. The Duff's routine variation was the idea that you would use the idea of jumping right in somewhere, and the way you would decide where to jump in is you would have like a sort of like a program counter. You'd have like a number that whenever you pass that label, you set the particular variable. Let's call it the program counter, even though that's not what it is. You set that to whatever the number is on the label you just passed, and then when you call this later, you can jump right back to that same spot. It's not exactly how it works. It's more about when you decide to yield from a current spot, that happens. Now the problem with that is it kind of works like a coroutine, but it's more limited. In a real coroutine, you can yield from any level of depth on the stack. So you can have. Do I have? So in a real coroutine, if this is my stack right here, right? On a Duff's routine, what happens is you have your main program. Oops. It's filling some spots. We'll call this main program, and then you have some special frame. We'll put it right here. That is the Duff's routine. Call that the Duff's routine. And then you just have some more spots on your stack above this. And it's one single stack, and this right here is sort of simulating the idea of being re-enterable, where you can yield from it and then resume where you yielded. But none of these do not simulate re-entrance. You can't re-enter to anything that this calls. You can only re-enter into this. On a real coroutine, the difference is that you have a main stack, and it goes like this, and then it could have more space above here, right, that it's not using. And so here's your main, and then when you call to the real coroutine, that first frame that has a jagged line over there is actually at the bottom of a separate stack. So you call to this, and then you keep going. And what this means, the reason on this one over here, right, these are different types. The reason that this one over here, because by the way, this is our coroutine. Okay, the reason that this one over here you can't return from these is because if you try to yield from this, you have to yield from this back to this point, right? This is where you're yielding to. And if you yield from this to this, you have to throw away all this information, but then you can't resume into there later. When you have it on a separate stack, what happens is you can be at this point and you can yield to this, and when you yield, you keep this stack around so that when you're done, when you want to re-enter, you're re-entering with the whole stack in place. And for the purposes of things like get user input, you really need this ability to make it actually work, because for one thing, we're definitely going to be several frames into the stack anyway, and secondly, you want to be able to make these things callable. You want to be able to write a thing that does the yield and wrap that around a thing, and maybe wrap that around a thing. And that's what I have in the current system. Is there's several wrappers around the actual yield function that you call right here, or like your yield command, right? It doesn't have to be all figured out how to do it in this frame, so I can write wrappers around it that this one is calling. And this here doesn't really need to deal with the direct yield. So that's why I have this in that position, and the reason I don't like it is because since this is a separate thread, it wreaks havoc with Windows. It also is very complicated in that you have to be careful. You can't do things like if you're in this coroutine and it wants to launch another thing that's a coroutine, that would make sense, but then you have to be careful not to like resume this, or like, you know, you could imagine a thing where this yields to this and then this yields to this and then this resumes this, but it just gets very nasty. The control flow, you don't want your control flow ending up this nasty, and that's how it ends up. So I want to get off of this, but the upsides are great too, which is that you can do that thing where you have some code that runs linearly like normal code, and then makes a call that you can say, oh, some number of frames go by until this call returns, and it's kind of magic. Like, I don't have to think about what's happening in there. That's happening on a different thing, but that magic has to be implemented here, and it's super hard to get it right without bugs. So yeah. So I got a link to a library for coroutines. I'll have to take a look at that. I have not seen it before. But we're gotten too far off topic. We'll get back to working on this. So I'm debugging why the control key is pressed on all my keys. Yeah, that looks like the control index is down. And can I see key.keycode as a char? Alright, so there's my underscore. And suppose I come around again. Now I'm going to go in here. I just got out this. And the modifier says 1 here. Why does it say 1 here? Where did that come from? There's the 4. Alright, key data. What is that? Let me try this again. Okay. Boom. Boom. Ah, shit. Boom. we want to know when this is greater than 0. Boom. There we go. We'll step in here. Alright, so not consumed. Result equals the available keys. So you're telling me the available keys already have coded into them this idea that they're all stupid. How did they get born with the idea that they were stupid? That's what I want to know, because I certainly don't want them thinking that they're stupid. I want them to do the right thing, which is, you know, have the correct modifiers attached. Yep, they have that idea. Available input. Where did that come from? Here it is. Input keys. Okay, so even that has this idea that these have these ones in them. How did it... What? Yeah, they all say they have a control key pressed. How did they even think that? I don't understand. That's why I can't put more than 8, why I can't put all 10 in there. I see. Count keys, how many spots are there? 10? Yeah, so I can put up to 8 in there. Wait, why am I an app init? I went too far. Alright, so what I want is platform. This stupid file system is totally stupid. Okay. Simulate. What's the code I'm looking for? The stuff that does the keys. Yeah, this stuff. I want to see right there. Cool. Boom. Okay. Ah, I already see it. It's a bug in the simulation layer. It's okay. People. This right here, perfect example of why you've got to clear your memory to 0. Never neglect to clear your memory to 0, because you're going to have to do it anyway. Whoa, that was weird. What was that? Did you see that? Oh, it scrolled. Why was it scrolled over? Watch this panel right here. Why on earth did it scroll? What? Man. That's so wild that we can find bugs this way. Wow. Oh, I'm loving this. Wow, okay. So, I want to look for a minimal reproduction case of that real quickly. So it has nothing to do with the backspaces. We don't need any of this. We don't need that. We don't need... we might need that. I'm not sure if we need these things or not. I'm going to see if we need these things. It scrolled horizontally. Watch. Watch again. I think it'll still happen. Yeah, they both say scratch, but the one on the bottom looks empty. But if you watch, you can just barely see it scrolling to the right because of the smooth scrolling. You can just barely catch it. They should both say the same thing. They're the same buffer. But yeah, it's totally it's scrolling over to it's putting the view exactly on the cursor for some reason. And it's doing it after inserting the characters. Oh, this is gonna force me to make everything be super solid. I'm so excited. I can't explain how exciting this is. Okay. I don't even know why it's so exciting. It's just like, well, the reason it's exciting is I've made several testing systems before. Like I tried kind of like having a testing system built into the custom layer that would exercise certain things like the API and try to test from that end that everything worked. And I just never could really keep those tests operational. And I feel like the other problem with that was I couldn't discover bugs that way. I could only do regression tests that way. And with this system, I've already discovered 2 bugs just from playing around with it. I'm not even like auto-generating my tests from like a template or something yet. And I also have the sense that this is a kind of test that will last a long time because unlike the custom layer, this input stuff doesn't change very much from very often. So it'll be much easier to keep the tests correct. Like it'll keep not necessarily correct, but at least correct in valid, if not correct, right? They might be testing the wrong thing if I change what some key is bound to, and that's the thing I'll have to figure out how to deal with. But it definitely will be able to last a long time when I build a test this way, I think. So those 2 prospects combined have me excited. Now, I'm still not sure we have found the most minimal reproduction case of this. I want to just do a little bit more experimenting to see what else we can find. So there, it just typed in 4coder and didn't have a problem. What if I split it this way? Yep, that does the same thing. I kind of want it to, like, not split the panel initially, and then just do this right away. Like, where I want to go with this is, I don't need this. I don't need this. I only need this, and ideally I would be able to avoid the other panel. The only easy way to do it is like this. So maybe a part of this is just I build specialized custom layers to go with the tests, which is a little less than ideal, because as soon as I have to build a specialized custom layer to go with a particular test, now that test is bound to the API status at the time. And so if I was better at API longevity kinds of things in the 4coder API, this would maybe not be a problem, but I'll have to think about that part. Anyway, yeah, we're looking for hooks start. Yeah, so it's giving me a side-by-side panel. I want to look at my 4coder default framework side-by-side panels. What are my other options? Alright. So now it should be in a state where it just immediately splits and then does I'm just going to put messages in there and then it'll be different. Damn. Alright, never mind. We'll leave the second panel there just 'cause. Okay, so now we want to figure out why that happens. And to find out, I think the easiest thing to do will be to just have a breakpoint that lets me walk through the code on that frame. So what's the easiest way to achieve that? See, one thing I'm really going to want is, in addition to normal input, when I'm doing this, I may want to be able to say that I pass in some kind of input that's called like the debug number, right? And then I can put a breakpoint in here that says if debug number equals this, then break at the beginning of each step. And that way I can break on the frame that has the interesting thing that I want and walk through the whole thing, right? So I'm thinking something like this. I want to be able to go input debug number equals 1, and then I'm going to just build that in. That'll become a permanent feature. And debug number. Alright, so on this frame something's gonna go wrong, and we're gonna step through everything to find out what. Exciting, huh? Alright, so checking that files are up to date. Yep. Reorganizing the panels on the screen. They're good. Excuse me. No mouse stuff. Alright. Uh-oh. I actually better make sure I get that part right. I suppose. Basically, to tell whether or not a particular call to the app step was a real update or not, it just checks if the DT is greater than 0, and the times when the DT is not greater than 0, what it means is that app step got called to do wait, is that still possible? I think that's an old feature that is now removed. It used to be possible to try to repaint 4coder without actually updating the state, and I think that that's gone. So this is just a scar from old systems, but technically that should be there, but probably not in this way. I don't know. I'm gonna just ignore it because it works and it's not the problem right now. Okay. Find out who the mouse pan is on. We find out if we're moving any panels. We are not. And now we update child processes. There are no child processes. Kind of weird that we bother to do this much setup when there are none of them. I should probably put an if on this first, huh? Still gotta boil this down a little bit. I mean, why do we put that there and put that there? It's weird. And for that matter, why exactly we're putting that there and that there? Models just comes out of vars too. Probably just putting it there because I think I want to avoid umpteen levels of pointer indirection. But it seems weird. I don't know. Gonna ignore that. It's not a bug. So on we go. Available input. Keys. There are 7 keys. Here they are. Underscore 4coder. This one has a modifier. These ones don't. All that good stuff. I have to check because one of these, if it has a modifier, could actually explain it. But it shouldn't, right? No, that would be really weird. I missed one. I don't think the R would be the one that would explain it, which would be the one at the end, but okay. Okay. We have no command coroutines. Here's a dead input. Here's an active input. Here are the keys. This whole available input, active input stuff is just a bit wacky. But again, it's not broken. At least I don't think so. Yeah, okay. This is super stupid. I shouldn't be doing that. This is stupid. I want to stop doing that everywhere. Right, so the active input, dead input thing is we give different input handles to different panels so that only one of them is processing active input, but they all get to process input so that they all have the same code path for stepping. Man, they all get a real X and Y and a real mouse state. They just don't all get real keys is actually the only difference. It's kind of a weird way to implement it, but it works, so we're ignoring that. Do step file view. What happens in here? This is for the inactive one, so I wouldn't expect anything interesting to happen. GUI nonsense. Oh gosh, I gotta clear this stuff out. I'm gonna leave it for the 40x build because stability and all that, but it's gonna be gone in the new engine. Every single portion of this code base that starts with the letters GUI is all fucked up. Oh my goodness. Yeah, Fire it's all bad. It's so bad. It's like ridiculously stupid. I I don't know what it's not it's weird because it feels like it should be something that is trivial, so why don't I just get it right? I don't understand why it happens. But it's so weird. Alright, none of this matters. How long is this going to go on for? Is it really this much? GUI session in it. How did I end up with this much? What? I'm not even really sure I understand why I have a GUI buffer already. Target. Well, I mean, the good news is I basically, with this new job at RAD, I've basically been hired to come in and be the guy who deals with GUI nonsense that the super smart people don't want to have to be dealing with. Like, um, uh, I'm gonna probably right now I'm working on just like setting up a GUI interface, like framework slash engine slash library um, that I feel like I can really actually use. I'm like studying it properly, researching how to get it right, and I'm looking forward to like feeling like I know how to do it. And then it's going to be basically my job to go to all the kinds of internal tools and projects and things that they want to throw a GUI on and get it done for them. That's my first sort of major assignment, or the theme of my several assignments, I guess. And yeah, I'm looking forward to like having that much time to really figure out how to get it right because it's so ridiculous to even that it's even a thing. Like conceptually it's trivial, so why does it turn out to be such a mess? I don't understand. Where did these GUI commands come from? Okay, so GUI target has already been filled at a previous call that I missed. Let me just scroll up real quick over here and see if I can figure out where that happened. Oh, I skipped over step file view. That's the important one. Okay, next time I'll make sure not to do that. Step file view and do step file view are totally different functions. This oh my god. Look at this is the one that basically implements the GUI, and this is the one that implements the GUI, right? I'm not trying to be funny. It's hard to describe, like, I mean, this one is just a do of this one. So this one kind of like does all the logical, like, here's where I want things to show up, and here's the changes in state that I want to do, and here's this and that, and blah 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 blah. Then this one does all the, like, okay, this is where the button is supposed to be, put the button there in the layout and interact with it and carry that over to the next frame, and that doesn't even render it yet. There's a third time that we call the GUI when it'll actually render it. Anyways, point is, let's go to the other view, and before I do that, I'm going to read some quick questions here. Dave Chat, Q, do you have an opinion on IamGUI? I don't know if you're talking about a particular library or just the concept. I don't have, a lot to say about any of that. The libraries seem fine. I don't use them because I just like to write it myself. A part of it, I think, intrinsically is I will always be someone who prefers to own the GUI code that I'm using, just because even a good version of it will be a finicky thing that you kind of want to know the quirks of it. So even if I figure out the ideal way to work out the quirks for my particular style, and then I found someone who wrote a library that very closely matched that, I still wouldn't want to use that library because the nature of quirks is even if the quirks are set up the way you would like them, the chances that they're named the way that you'll predict them that they're named, and that every single one of them is something you can depend on, and that the quirks are set up, like getting confirmation that the quirks are actually set up the way you want them is very hard to do, right? You'd have to just read all the code and understand it, and I don't know, it's harder to understand code by reading it than by writing it for me. Like, it works out better, even if it's a little more time consuming to write it. So library-wise, I don't love it. I think you should just write your own GUI and let it work out the way it's supposed to work out. Is IamGUI a good way to write those? I guess. I think it's better than anything where you, in the sense that it's very confusing because it depends on what you think IamGUI means. If you're talking about the idea of like having a call that's like create button, set button position, delete button, that kind of stuff, I don't do any of that. And that would be a disaster. Like, basically what you want to think about is, you have some concepts that are in your program, right? Like, whatever the buttons and the sliders and whatever your GUIs are that you're using to manipulate stuff, you have this concept that you're manipulating those things. And when you want to change how that GUI, when you have the concept of like, here's the layout of my GUI, or here's the way you interact with a button in my GUI, or whatever your concept is, or here's the button that interacts with this feature of my program, or whatever. You want, those are all concepts that you and your brain can conceive of, and you want, as often as possible, that when you pick a concept that you care about out of your head, that you're like, oh, today I care about this concept, that there be one spot in your code that you go to deal with that. And that's not possible to get it so that it's always one, but you want as close to that as possible. If you have to, for any concept that you're likely to pick out of your head, go visit the create and the destroy and the set state and all these different disparately spread out things for that one concept, then you've done a poor job of localizing the most important thing to a particular spot. And in the sense that IamGUI does a good job of the way IamGUI forces you to localize those kinds of concepts to one spot, it's much better. You could show me, if you could show me like a retain mode GUI that's like, no, all of the code for controlling this button is right here, and this button doesn't show up in some kind of like a sheet that declares the layout or anything else, it's just all right here is how I do my button, then I wouldn't mind that retain mode-ness very much. It'd still be kind of odd, because once you're at that point, it's very easy to wrap that in an immediate mode call anyway, right? So, yeah, I think that's a part of the situation. That's all there is to it. I don't have a lot of insight into it. I feel like one of the problems with IamGUI is I'm not clear on what the best implementation behind the API is. Like, obviously, in theory, you can put any implementation behind it, but what's the implementation that makes it most likely to be bug-free is what I'm interested in finding, and I haven't. Vavasaur asks, is it just going to be GUI for internal tools or user-facing? I assume you're talking about my work at RAD. I have no idea. It depends on how good it is if it becomes user-facing. The idea for now is that it's internal tools, um, and we'll, work out from there what I'll work on next. And uh, if I end up putting my GUI on anything else. Fiery Drake, yeah. If I can, I will. Share as much as I can once I have anything to share. So far, all I've really been doing is like working on font stuff, so I don't even have the beginning of actually studying the problem I care about. But font stuff is interesting too. I'll need that 4coder someday. Not too long, really. So, yeah, it's pretty cool. All right, here we go. So I'm taking the active input. Yes. Step file view. Okay. So this one actually is going to process the keys. We're not showing any UI. GUI begin top level. Oh boy. Here goes. So we're doing a top bar. Doing the widgets. Begin serial section. Oh, this is gonna be nightmare level of bad. Like, I don't really actually want to debug this right now. Kind of dreading it. When I read this, it causes this, I can feel like a shift in my brain. It's this feeling of, like, water flowing down the sides of my head, or some kind of liquid flowing down the sides of my head, like, right underneath my skin, just trickling down, like, the, sort of flooding my brain with chemicals of hatred and dread. That's what it feels like in my head. I imagine that's what I just experienced. Alright. But we must power through. Okay, that did it to me there too, because that's a pointer, but it doesn't look like a pointer because I didn't put the not equal 0 there. Bad style all over the place. So I'm grabbing a scroll. Okay, so I had a scroll pointing there, and all we're doing is I'm saying, look, okay, so this is a thing that should be an assert, because views always have files now. That used to be the case that they could be null, but that's should be an assert. You know what? I'm gonna just start stopping and nitpicking everything, because at some point I have to make these things better, and if I'm not going to do it now, then nothing will ever force me to do it, because this is when I'm supposed to be making improvements that the the tester helps me find. The weird thing about it is, so Fiery Drake is saying he has he's having a pain right now. He's got GUI stuff where there's something that's got some dynamic state that is tied up to some other thing's dynamic state, and it's like a pain just to figure out what happens when and how it all relates, right? And wait, what? Why is this getting set to 0? Right, because it's going to set the file right there. Now why are we setting that to 0 first? It does not equal 0. We touch the file. So this is to control whether or not we touch the file that we were just using. Okay. Well, that's lame. Going to have a look at that code everywhere later. Sorry. So, yeah, I'm a little confused by this code. We'll study it some other time. Like this one right here, I think this can just be an assert file does not equal 0. I think this can be an assert file does not equal 0. And man, there's a lot of these. Am I sure? Am I sure file data.file can't be 0? Because man, I still have a lot of spots where it thinks it can be. I'm pretty sure though that we have eliminated this possibility. So yeah, there's see, like right here I'm asserting file is not equal 0. Okay. Here I'm doing it. So, on this point of having lots of dynamic data that relates to other dynamic things, and it's hard to even figure out what's going on, and you just got to think through it properly, I've noticed a few things about that. So one thing is, I've told myself that several times trying to figure out the relationship between the scrolling position and the cursor on 4coder. Now it sounds super trivial. It's like, no, you just set the scroll to always contain the cursor, and you know, if you move the cursor you set the scroll. But there's also cases where you move the scroll and you don't move the cursor, right? So you sometimes set the cursor, the scroll, and then adjust the cursor if needed. So that's not that hard either, though. You just like, oh, is the cursor too close to the bottom? Then adjust the cursor, right? But then it just becomes this problem of like, okay, well, what if I also have? I don't know if I actually have a way to pull it up right now. Oops. There. What if I also have this thing? Well, it turns out that for this I need a different way to control where the scrolling happens, and so you end up wanting to set the scroll in a slightly different way, and so that's fine. You can do that, and then this can also affect the scroll, and we're right now dealing with a scrolling bug that relates to the scroll and the cursor, and you can just see that for whatever reason, although it feels absolutely trivial, like I can reason through and be like, here I can in my head picture what the data relationship is, it's very hard to picture all of the different ways these two things can change and affect the other one, and be confident in any way that you've accounted for all of them in an adequate way. And I think a part of the problem is that GUIs are maybe not really, C is probably really not a good language for writing GUIs in, I don't think. A good language for GUIs would probably so it doesn't let you do things that you would want to do, like express the relationship between two things as a constraint that is used everywhere in both directions kinds of things. It doesn't let you express things like, I'm going to say if this event that's going to happen or not happen that I can't evaluate yet does occur, then I want to respond with this code. Like, you can't write code in this location that spreads out to a hit, chat, test, a render, and a respond, 3 different responses to that one piece of code. The way IMGUI boxes you in is that in trying to push all that code into one spot, the disadvantage is it's very hard to find a way to simultaneously lay that out and hit test it, render it, and respond to the input all literally right there. Even though that's the way you wish the code could be organized, it's like C doesn't quite let you express it that way in a good sense. So I feel like there should be some research into how do you make an imperative language that is low level, that could link to C, but that is dramatically different in terms of organization of that kind of stuff, so that GUIs wouldn't be such a pain. Alright, so anyway, I take that scroll bar off, and let me run this. I'm just making sure real quick that it runs without crashing now. It does. I should probably run a test that actually tries opening a file too. Let me do that real quick. I'm gonna whip up a quick test, and the way I will do this is I will use my keyboard to generate the input. That way I don't have to write the code that simulates the input. Did you guys see how I tried to make it sound complicated? Because I thought it was funny. Okay. Zen Mystic, where's a good place to post things that I would like in 4coder? A post on the forum would be ideal for future requests. That way, the only one I mostly send people to the forum unless you have a bug, in which case I prefer it in my email. Well, it depends. If you have a bug that I can fix, I would prefer it in my email. If you have a bug that is like the community can help you find a workaround, then the forum actually turns out to be better. But I find it just easier because I have most of my bug reports come into the email, but I have a few that show up on the forum. So when I'm creating a list of bugs to fix, I get the ones in the email first, and so they just tend to be handled sooner. I'm on top of them more. But the forum is better for most things because you get feedback from other people, discussion, exploring, that kind of thing. So forum is the place to go for features for sure. Alright, so that is looking good. Let's get back to this. Bad fly dog. Oh, hello, Drunk Dane. I saw you, but I don't know if I said hello. Bad fly dog suggests that Ginger Bill's language Odin addresses my problem with GUI programming. But I have no idea if that is correct or not, or why I should think that that's correct. Alright. So, now, we're zooming on ahead. Blah, 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 blah. It's not the first step. Blah, blah, blah. What? Shit. Yeah, I suspect the reason I ask is because I haven't looked at Odin for a super long time, so who knows? Maybe he went ahead and started looking at this kind of thing. But I suspect you would have to say, you know what, my goal today is to write the GUI layout language that rules them all, and that you wouldn't really use this, you wouldn't really get this from just starting from a systems programming language perspective. I don't know, it's a weird thing to say, because it sounds like I'm saying we need like a scripting language, but that's not what I'm saying. I'm talking about, like, just a radically different way of organizing. The way the compiler right now works in a system programming language is nearby code. If it's declarative code, like here's a struct, here's a function declaration, or here's the signature of a function, here's a struct, etc., that stuff can be kind of reordered as long as it does, if it's C, you have to be a little careful how you reorder it, but for the most part, nearby things can be organized however you want. But it doesn't really let you do things like in executable portions of the code, like this kind of code. It doesn't let you say, have things that are near to each other in the code that get spread out in the executable in any useful way. It's very hard to get it to do things like that. In fact, it's the only way to actually get it to do anything like that is always ugly. Either you're simulating that but you're not actually doing it, or you're you could in C++ kind of do this with like localized like functions inside of structs. Some weird stuff you can try, but for the most part, it's pretty hard to write code that conceptually is all related, but in the way it executes is spread out in complicated ways in C, and in pretty much any system language. For that matter, it's hard in scripting languages too, so shit. Yeah, and this wouldn't be declarative like HTML. That's the kind of thing I'm thinking people might think I'm saying, like where you just declare a UI. You would still want it to do more than that, because that has the kind of reverse problem where you get the nice declarative. It looks like, oh, I'm listing out. I mean, it's not nice because HTML, give me a break. But if it were a better syntax, you could at least be like, oh, we're just doing layout and it's great, and all of my layout concerns are right here. But then you can't say like, I'm putting in a button and here's what this button controls in the next line. Like, you have to have a fucking separate language that connects to that button. So it doesn't really solve the problem at all. It's just because it's meant for laying out stuff doesn't mean that it does anything like what I'm saying. In the sense that I'm saying, it's not meant for laying stuff out. It is as bad as writing code in C because things either have to be spread out, which is bad, or if you try to put them near each other, then they become unmaintainable for other reasons. Hard to actually get them to do fully featured things that you want sometimes. That's fine. Do file. So right there I just laid out all of the GUI related things for that view. Where do I execute any commands? So none of that consumed keys. Context change in step? No. So again, I don't think that this is legitimate. I think that that should always be an assert. So we're basically setting the scroll vars. If we're not showing GUI, we're setting the scroll vars to the scroll of the current edit position. I should really get down to one edit position again, because that's not even working correctly anyway. It's all fucked up. File scroll. Okay. So we're doing that one. Fine. Lame, but fine. Do step file view. Now, interesting. So I'm going to skip over this for now. I want to take a note that I'm planning to come back and fix this. And when I say I'm going to take a note, I'm actually going to stop and do that and then restart because I'll forget. So this code here should be just asserting that the file is not null because, again, that isn't supposed to ever happen anymore. I think that means scroll 0 can just go away. Hey, it happens a second time. Alright, so we're saying nothing interesting is actually happening here. Yeah, so the scroll region right now is still all the way to the left. Okay, and I can see this because... Wait, no, this is the scroll region. This is another problem, is the naming. Does scroll region mean the region that is visible within the file, or the region within the screen which is scrollable? That's what it means in this case. Key data. Alright, now we're going to start executing commands. Unclear. Unclear. That's super lame. So then we go and search for the binding. That's not really relevant. We find the binding. It is not an escape, so it hit something good. Alright, so it's just about to launch a coroutine, after which I'm just going to skip past this one because all it does is split the panels. And now, and it exits right away, so this does not equal. The reason that this does equal 0 is because the command finished, right? This gets set to non-zero permanently when you call a command coroutine and it yields rather than returning and finishing. So now what we're going to do is create a coroutine and launch it, and this time I want to find it. So default bindings, default framework, base commands, write character. Now why is write underscore a command? I forget if that's a serious thing or if it was an experiment or what. Oh, that was for when I was trying shift space equals write underscore. Yeah. Yep. Didn't like that. That turned out to be a problem. Because I have a heavy pinky that won't come off the shift key while I'm typing capital letters. So I was always going back and deleting underscores. Alright, let's see what happened. So, coroutine main, command caller, default command caller, exec command, write character. Okay. Slightly uncomfortable depth on that call stack there. If we didn't need to have these two, it would help. If we didn't need to have these two, it would help. And by the way, we don't need these two, and I'm going to eliminate them in the new API. So we get the command input, we find out what we're inserting, we go to write the character. Alright, so this is the part I actually care about. Anyway, buffer replace range. I go in here. Now what I want to see is if at any point this is there any way to currently get Casey's 4coder binding? He ships it in Handmade Hero code, and it's no. I am not distributing it right now. Actually, that's a good point. I have some code that I was using as the incentive for the power level in Patreon. Now that I'm off that, I suppose I'll just start shipping that. I'll probably just start shipping that with everything else. I'll get rid of that extra tier. For the rest of 4.0x, you'll just get the power code along with everything else in the next builds, I suppose. So otherwise I'll never put it out, which I probably should do. Oh geez, all of this is lame. This is lame. Okay. Okay, this is the cursor fixing part where things could get wild, folks. And the reason things could get wild... sorry, I can't get that for you right now. The 4coder Casey is a little out of date, so... do you have an old copy of 4coder Casey that isn't working, or do you have no copy of it at all? Yeah, how about Zen Mystic? If you could send that for him, that'd be great. I don't want to screw around with uploading files on the internet right now. Yeah, I'm fine with you giving that to him. Okay, a couple things. One, I don't plan on ever going to 5. The plan is to just put a 4 at the beginning of the version number for all of time. So it's really version 0 point whatever the version is right now. The 4, I mean, back on Patreon I did do 1, 2, 3, 4, and then I hit 4 and realized I should probably just have a 4 on the version for the rest of time. So I then built it out to always do 3 digits, with the kind of minor version being in the 3rd position, and the major in the 2nd position, and then in the 1st position was just the canonical 4. So with that in mind, and out of the way, there's no 5x ever. 4.1.x will be a new version that is bought separately when it comes out. Yeah. Basically, I'm going from alpha to beta. So we've been in the OX series for a long, long time. I'm bringing that to an end. A few more builds to stabilize it, and then 1X will come out, and that'll be a new line that'll be bought, that I'll sell separately from the original line. And I'm going to avoid doing that too often. It'll be every few years, right, that I'm like, all right, this maybe it's time to we're putting something new and big in there. The other thing is, at some point, I think probably while I'm in beta at that point, I'll start stabilizing the core, and I'm actually just going to open source most of the core 4coder stuff, like free open source it, and just prevent people from. It won't be like anyone can submit a pull request kind of thing, or what is it, push? I don't know how Git works. It won't be like any edits go or anything like that for a while still. But once I'm done with development of the core, I'll just kind of stop being stop trying to get money for it, because it's not really commercially viable. Instead, what I'll try to do is make money on the customization, like on the nice customization layers for, like, oh, here's a pack with all your editors that you could ever want, or a debugger, or whatever else. So yeah, I don't intend to have too many versions that you have to pay for. Probably one or two more before I'm done with that. Of course, it depends on how things go. Maybe I decide that 4coder's not going anywhere good, and I just retire it early and move on to a different project. Hard to say what exactly I'll do. Alright. Cursor max. I grab cursors. I grab R cursors. Insert cursors does not equal 0. Okay. Very good. Panel. I go over all the panels. I grab the views. So here's where I'm writing out these things. Okay, so we did on two different ones we did that. Okay. So marker iterator, marker sentinel, DL items, marker 8 over the sentinel, count equals marker 8. Now I'm taking all the markers and writing them in. Right cursor with index, R cursors, R cursor count. That marker there. I update all my cursors. Then I unsort them. Okay, yep. Ooh. This should have an or R cursor count is greater than 0. That's a bug. We'll resume from here in a second. this test system is actually sweet. It's not just a test system anymore, it's also a debug system because it lets me do this, jump straight to the frame with the problem and then like iterate in like this. I don't know. We keep on asserting the view edit position is non-zero. Is there any reason to do that? I feel like that would always be true. On the other hand, I guess that's why I'm asserting it, to make sure it is, but I'd kind of like to just make that not be a pointer. Okay, so here we go. We're looking at a scroll now. This could be relevant. So here we set the cursor, here we set the mark, and then we compute the scroll I. Scroll I equals 0. Okay. This does not equal this. It does equal that. But if they didn't, then that would mean computing the cursor of the scroll. There's some kind of bug in there. I don't know what it is, but I know that it's in there somewhere. Anyways, we're skipping over all that. View, set cursor, and scroll. Set cursor and so the new cursor is right here. I see. So the file has multiple edit positions, doesn't it? It's moving one of them to the front, and then leaving the other one where it was. And the reason, okay. So it's because that never ends up in the front for some reason. Yeah, I have to figure that shit out. Goes to the other view. Does the other view go differently? Well, it doesn't look like it. Checks the markers. This is one leans right, and we end up with a 1. Perfect. So there's our cursor fix. Now I read out that 1, there it is, and I remove those markers from the buffer, and now I'm setting the cursor again. Man. Bad Fly Dog. Will a smarter highlight system be implemented anytime soon? Let's say in the next half year. I am thinking about highlighting things other than keywords, such as types from earlier declarations, kind of like Visual Studio. So the plan is that in the new engine, this is one of the parts of the new engine that I haven't actually implemented or looked at very closely yet, so I'm kind of talking out of my ass a little bit, but one of the plans is to look at that problem while working on the new engine. In particular, I'm not just interested in having more options for highlighting, but rather making the highlighting programmable, just fully programmable. In fact, the plan is to get off of, like, the basic core plan is to get off of the idea that the cursor is a thing that the core even knows about, and get into a world where the idea that a cursor even exists is implemented in the custom code. And once you're doing something that general, you have to be able to say things like, okay, put a cursor at this location, and this location, and this location, and if you can already do that, well, what does your cursor look like? Is it a fat block, a thin line, or a colored text? All of those are basically the same thing. Like, in the sense of how much work it is to implement a thing that can do all of those, it's all very much the same. So I'm looking more towards a general idea where you can take a buffer and attach to it things that are like, here are various points in the buffer that I care about, and how I want you to color them. And that's how you end up customizing that. Now that might be an inconvenient way to customize how you color those strings. I'm not sure. We will see. Okay, on we go, on we go. So, we're setting the cursor. We're going to go take a look at that. Here we're inserting the file. And the file is not loading. Then, we're going to compute the cursor. What's the cursor that we get out from that? Position 1, character 2, character position 1, line 1, wrap line, yep, that's all good. That's the right cursor. Now if I set the cursor to that, that shouldn't move the view, right? Position, move to front, group, set cursor. And when I set cursor, for X, for last set type. Oh, jeez. That's so lame. That's so lame. That's so lame. Last set type? Ugh. I remember thinking that through and it's terrible. It's stupid. Move view to cursor. Whoa. I know what the bug is. That's the bug right there. Oh man, so this isn't really a bug I can fix. This is just a part of the GUI being crap. So we've learned yet again that I have to make a more real GUI that isn't horrible. But basically what's coming out of this is what's coming out here is every single fact about the GUI is a frame of lag. So the visible height is something we use for figuring out how to clamp things to the right position. Same thing with widths. It looks to me like what we're seeing is that since it doesn't have real information yet, it doesn't know that the cursor is still on view, and so it's scrolling to it more aggressively. So let's what the line height widget is. If visible height is greater than line height, it is not. Max equals visible height equals negative line height. And then those get clamped to 0. And then the delta gets clamped to 0. And so we go through here. Max x. Where did we get max x? View width. Yeah, basically the same problem. It thinks that the width has a view of 0, and so it believes it has to set the target x right onto the cursor. Okay, so there we go. That's how debugging with this system works. It's pretty useful, but just because I can find the bug doesn't mean I'm going to fix it. That was one of those cases where the bug is too bad. Yeah, I'm going to figure out how to stop doing that because it's horrible, the next frame stuff. Like, compute the size of this thing on this frame so that it can be immediate mode GUI and not feed that information backwards to the thing that needed it earlier. This goes into the idea of something I was talking about while you weren't here, Krifa, about C being a really poor language for implementing GUIs just because you can't represent a concept that is related to other concepts in a way where all the related concepts are near each other but not necessarily executed in similar positions in the actual program. It leads to all kinds of problems when you delay this stuff by frames. I'm not sure if I understand you, Fiery Drake. Layout constraint resolution. If you're talking about like height and width, it's leading to the problem. Yo, is that a troll? Yeah, I imagine that's a troll. Here we go. How does one assign moderation? I forget. How does one do it? I don't remember how to give someone in the room mod powers. Ah, here's how I do this. Boop. There we go. Yes. Well, let's see. Who's it gonna be? I think since you know the command, I'm gonna make you the mod. And there we go. Alright. Thank you for volunteering, Krifa, to be my new mod. And onwards and upwards. So, I can track down bugs with this system. I can't fix those bugs because the thing I'm tracking down turns out to be a nightmare of GUI bullshit that I don't want to deal with. But, I can at the very least track it down. So now let's get on to building out better debug or testing stuff here. So I can test all kinds of useful stuff now. We got this cool idea of a debug number. We got this idea of whether or not I'm enforcing a mouse correctly, or if I can do any kind of mouse stuff. I have keyboard events, basically everything I could want. Exit. So the next part is I don't want to have to keep writing these switches and like, pasting code in or something to run all my tests. I want to have some kind of driving system that auto does this, and I just load in a chunk of data and run it, and it is a test, right? So let's try to clean this up a little bit. I have all these local persists. I'm thinking struct. So let me come up here to this spot. Input simulation controls. Rick-a-dick do. Boop. Boop boop. Boop 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 boop. Alright, Bad Fly Dog has a question. I added a custom language for Odin, but it doesn't work with my virtual whitespace. Everything starts and x0. What tokens do I have to add to make it work? Do I have to read etc. with the correct token type? Okay, so everything starts at 0 on virtual whitespace. Yeah, so what you're going to want to get are parentheses, braces, semicolons, comments, commas. I think that would cover everything. Let's take a quick peek. That's for getting style colors. Where's my... No, that's for guessing at... So there's a lot of stuff here, like, if you want to get it really detailed and you get all of your, like, the more you get information you give it, the better it'll do. Some of the stuff you might not care so much about. Identifier you want. So yeah, parentheses, brackets, braces, all of this stuff here. So to get good guesses on where to put wrap points, the most important things are identifiers, semicolons, commas, maybe dots. Basically, the closer it is, the better it'll turn out. Unless there's like a difference in the order of operations between C and Odin on important stuff. Because basically what this code here is doing is grouping things together more tightly if they are tighter operators, so that it wraps at looser operators, which like it feels right, more logical. You can see here brackets, braces, semicolons, colons, commas, comments are kind of the most important ones. Maybe string constants, if you're going to have multi-line string constants. So, I mean, yeah, it's up to you. The most important ones for just getting like indentation are definitely braces. Yeah, I would just add in as many operators as you can, because that's where most of the logic comes from. Okay, so let's take a peek back at what we were actually doing, which was this. Alright, so simulation init. Input simulation controls. Enforce regular mouse equals true. And other than that, we're going to memset the sim controls to 0. And so now this can just say input simulation controls. Well, that's not actually going to work, is it? Let's see here. Insabot is around. He's just, well, maybe he's not around anymore. He was around earlier today. He had some insightful comments about, something. Yeah, somewhere. Don't know. Oh, I don't think he's modded on this channel. Maybe I should mod Insabot. I don't know. I don't know if I can trust a robot to moderate my channel. So Karif is talking about an idea of taking a C file that you can include multiple times and you wrap it in various macros or if-defs or something so that you're only including different parts at different times. That way you have code that's related to each other, near each other in the C file, but then when you have those spots that you invoke that code, you're invoking different parts of it at different places to spread out the execution, which is exactly kind of what I'm getting at. But as he points out, it's just, you know, you still end up with some nasty problems. In particular, I'm not entirely sure why. Let's see, but it would get included multiple times, and before you included it, swap. But in the end, I gave up because the layout can be dependent on UI responses. So for some things, you would always have to be a frame behind. Okay, so this is important, right? This is kind of like you don't actually have to give that up. I don't know that that's a beautiful, like, Croifa likes to just go down like crazy difficult ways of implementing a thing. Like, I'm gonna just, you know, go to the nth degree, like, oh, did I go all the way to fully, completely going completely bananas when I implemented this? No. Well, then I could have done something more interesting than that. Then is kind of his approach almost always. And that's not a bad thing, by the way. It's like I show up to his streams and he's like, oh yeah, well I was trying this completely ridiculous and insane idea that would in theory solve all the problems, but in practice doesn't work because it's so crazy. But it's still so interesting to see what kind of solutions start to look like when they are semantically organized correctly, even if they still can't quite work. But in this case, I think that you gave up that you gave up because you just didn't. I mean, I'd have to see the case. Maybe I'm wrong and you're right, but this idea that there has to be a frame of lag, I don't think there has to be a frame of lag in any way where it counts. And what I mean by that is what I would do if I could is none of the state that the UI is based on would change at all until the very end. It would be the last thing you do. After you've tested, rendered, the last thing you would do is update the state. And the reason for that is that means that really the state update happened after everything else, so that you're still looking at the old state. And the only thing that means is that when you click and you detect in this frame that a click happened, you don't run a UI, because here's the idea. If you click and then somehow the UI should respond to that, which changes the state in such a way that the UI should now be different than what it was, and you're saying that you can't ever have that work, but that's not even like a coherent thought. Because if you define that the UI is such that the button is right here on this frame, and I clicked it, and that changed the state, you can't then also say, but now that means the UI should be different. No, the UI will have to be different on the next frame. The UI layout had to be defined this frame for the button to be there to click on. And you don't want it to go n times over, like, oh, and then that meant the UI was different, so that meant there wasn't a button there, which means, logically speaking, they didn't click the button, and the state didn't change, or like, you know, there was a different button there, the state changed this way after that, and then so on. No, what the ideal system would be is you say, here's the current state, pretend that this is immutable for a moment, lay out the whole UI, figure out what gets clicked, render it, and then go back and look at what was the thing that the user interacted with, change the state, and on the next frame they'll see that change in state. But everything that happened to show the UI to the user was correct for the state of that frame, right? If that makes sense. So the only thing that's really one frame of lag is input processing, in a sense, right? Like this state, you can't drive a UI from two different states on one frame, though. And so the ideal system would be that the last thing that happens is you change the state. That's all I'm saying. If you get that part right, how do you do everything else? I still don't know. But that's like a key component to how you want to think about it, I think. Dave Chat asks, what about multipass to save the one frame of lag problem? So the thing is the one frame of lag problem can basically happen for all kinds of reasons. But it depends on which thing has the frame of lag. So for instance, the thing we just talked about, is it that after I click, there's a frame of lag before I see the result of that click? Is it the case that if I, you know, resize a widget and then it gets its new size, this frame, that it doesn't lay itself out correctly for this new size, this frame, but it lays itself out correctly for the size next time? Like, right now, my current system, the problem it has is I just created a new panel, it has a new layout, and it's processing the input before it processes the fact that, like, it's processing the input all at once, right? So it processes the first input that says insert a new panel here, and doesn't give that thing dimensions. It processes another input that says insert a character, and then that insert of character says, okay, now scroll the thing based on the layout of this thing, but it hasn't done a layout pass yet because it's getting input right now. The UI is kind of already done, and so the problem that is happening there is that I have several inputs that I'm trying to do at once. If I wanted it to be totally correct, what I would do is each input event, I would redo the whole UI for that one, right? So I would fix my UI, do the whole thing till the state change. Like, don't do rendering, but do layout and then do state change, and then do that again for the next input event, and keep doing those two things: layout, state change, layout again, state change again, for each input event separately. And then on the last one, you would do layout and then render and then state change. And you could ask, why is that last one weird? Why is the render here? Well, you could do layout, state change, and then layout render. Potentially. But I have to think about it for a minute. A part of this is trying to avoid having to do that kind of back and forth thing. And so if you wanted, you could do lay it out once, do the state change for that layout, lay it out again, and then render it. And that would kind of work. The only problem then is the amount of work you have to do to set your thing up several times in a single frame. I don't know. Well, either way, the key idea here is that you can't do a state change and then keep using the layout, right? Once you've done a state change, the layout that you created for processing input is no longer valid. And like 4coder is making this mistake. It does a single layout, and then it processes several inputs, and those inputs can, as a part of their processing, refer back to the layout. I have to fix that. It can't be allowed that I do a layout and then process input, and then a part of what that input does is change, like mutate the state of the layout. That doesn't make any sense. The layout kind of has to be fixed for this frame, and you can change the layout that you're going to see next frame, but you can't change the layout that you're seeing this frame, because unless what you're saying is I'm changing the layout that not in the next frame, but I'm changing the next layout pass. So yeah, you could solve all of this by just doing multiple layout passes, if that makes sense. I'm kind of working this out as I go and inventing my own terminology as I go, but I feel like that's kind of the main idea I'm trying to get at. You want to lock the state of your UI, here's how it is, and that will be correct for anything you want to do with it until you do a state change. Because once you've done a state change, the UI that you thought you had is not the UI that you would have again. So the idea of the simplest one is layout, render, and then state change is because the state change, the render will be correct for this layout, right? If I did layout, state change, render, then this render is just garbage because I don't have there's no logic to what happens when I change that state. How did that affect the render? Did I insert wrong data into a layout that was for different data? I don't know. Anyway, I feel like that's probably a useful way to conceptualize it. End of that thought. The thing that will get tricky no matter what is that, like in 4coder, for instance, when you type, that changes where your cursor is, which wants to change where the scroll is. And managing to do that in such a way that you're not accidentally going back and mutating the state is the hard part, right? You have to make sure you architect it cleanly so that you know you're never trying to change the current state and maintain it. That's where it gets icky. You want to just generate a layout and use that layout for as long as possible without mutating it at all, not trying to update it because the state changed, but rather saying next time I really need a correct layout, I will lay it out again if I've had a state change. And until then, I'm just sort of queuing up changes that will need to be applied to the next state. And the other interesting thing is, let's explore if that's any different under retain mode, because a lot of people seem to think that all the difficulty comes from the immediate mode-ness, and that if you went back to retain mode, these things actually kind of work in a different way that works out. But in retain mode, what you have is you have a state, and when you interact with that state, it's pre-arranged in such a way that the data structure knows how to update the state. So the idea is that you do mutate the state all the time. You don't generate a state and then you don't generate a layout and then use it. Rather, you generate a layout that you sort of construct rather than generate, and you keep that state forever. And you're doing the game of every time something changes, you're not making a new state, rather you're mutating the existing state. And so I feel like there's no reason you couldn't do that in immediate mode APIs too. Actually, just assuming that you're not doing the naive implementation of the immediate mode, that is, where you just render and do everything right inside that single button call, but rather you do stages, right? If you have a system where you can do stages, where you generate a layout, you using that layout, you figure out what the interactions are, you render, and then you do your state change. When that state change happens, that's also when you would mutate the thing. So you could have multiple input events, and after each one you mutate the state in such a way that it remains correct for the next input event. The only problem there is kind of whatever data structure you come up with and whatever pre-arranged way you have of saying if this gets mutated because this button gets clicked, then do this. That can be arbitrarily complicated. Like a button getting clicked could have the response that the entire UI needs to be relayed out from right to left in Arabic instead of in English, and needs to have this tab open instead of that tab, and everything in the world could change. So that there's not really a right way to do that in a data format simpler than the code that lays out the state, right? In the immediate mode version, if that makes sense. The code that does the immediate mode layout is the thing that is as simple as possible to express all possible UIs. Anyway, that's my take. Enough UI talk. It was super useful for me actually, but enough of it. Because I grow tired. Come on. Fine, I'll just write it this way. Hey man, the thing is I know that I spent a lot of time experimenting with my style, and I never explored anywhere near as far as you do, and it's really hard to say when you start exploring what will and what won't pay off. Um, like I tried some things that I never like that I kept for a month and then I stopped doing that. I can still see scars from all kinds of different changes in style. Do you treat pointers? Do you do if putter, or do you if putter does not equal 0? I ended up doing does not equal 0, and that's so small. But the point was I decided that the only time something shouldn't have the equals equals or the not equals on it is if it's Boolean, so that I can infer from the if it's a Boolean or not. Um, and I still have spots all over my code where I don't use that, and that's just a tiny little small thing. That's totally not even close to like, do you do crazy macro stuff? So I do crazy macro stuff actually when it comes to OpenGL function loading, right? I don't know if you've messed with this before, but when you're loading OpenGL for yourself, you have this problem where there's a bunch of functions on Windows that you have to load manually that you want to use if you're not using OpenGL like 1. You want to like create a frame buffer, you want to create a shader, you want to submit an array of vertices to your shader. All these things, you have to load those functions yourself. And it turns out that a crazy macro scheme can actually be boiled down to something very nice and clean in that case. And so I was lucky that I found it, because I was kind of thinking of not doing it, and normally I wouldn't. I just kind of felt like I needed to solve that problem better, and so I went for the craziness, and I found one there. There's probably a lot of times where I've missed the good crazy solution because I judge it to be not worth it. So, having a lot of different people trying different things, like some people who, like you, just do something totally ridiculous every single time you face even a slightly annoying thing, you try to solve it perfectly, and it turns out to be way worse. I mean, yeah, you're probably wasting a lot of time in the sense that if you hadn't done that, you could have got more done, but is it a waste of time in the sense that it's a waste of time to explore these things? I don't think so, because a lot of them do pay off. Yeah. And hey, if you feel like it's bumming you out that your things always fail, then maybe stop the experiments. But it seems to be something that you're into, and it's useful to have people doing that kind of thing. Later, Zen Mystic. Alright. And just to be clear, my crazy Opengl macro thing is actually a thing that involves including the file multiple times with different macro definitions to change how it unfolds. It's not super crazy. All it does is it is a list of all the functions. Twitch will keep the video for like a week, and I'll upload it to YouTube. But if you're hoping to catch the rest of the chat, yeah, you'll want to catch it sometime this week. Anyways, what was I saying? Oh, what it does is it has a glfunc as the macro, and then the name of the function, the return, and then the parameters. And the parameters are in parentheses. And then close parenthesis, no semicolon, no comma at the end of the line, next line, another function, right? And at the end, it undefs the glfunc. And so if you want to do something that's like load all of these functions, it's just you define glfunc to be a thing that loads in a string using the wiggle load proc, and the string is set from the name of the function. If you want to type def all of the Opengl functions, you just define glfunc to the thing that would do a type def on whatever name you want, pasted with the name of the function, the macro, the return, and the parameters, and there you go. You've got a type def. You can do all kinds of fun stuff with this setup, and yeah, I almost didn't do it because I was kind of like, oh, that's a little too far, and then I started working with it, and I was like, no, it really is kind of great in that case. Yeah, basically the idea behind it is it's an X list, but it's an X list that is so long and has such long members to type out that it's just easier to do it as a file. It's just a file-sized X list. Alright, so we figured out why this has a bug. I've got the simulation thing cleaned up. I feel like I ought to take a break for dinner sometime soon too, but I want to continue on to driving this from some kind of data structure as well. And I'm torn which one I want to do. What would be the data structure? It would be a sorted list so that they come in order, because we can see even if I know that they're all on 50, they still have some kind of order. It would what else would it do? It would tell me which index to output on so that I can say, hey, is this one output on 50? Yeah, oh, output it then. Is this one output on 50? Yeah, and then I would loop through until I found one that wasn't output on 50 or until I got to the end. And then it would, inside there, when I go to output it, it would just be either a keyboard event, a mouse event, a debug number, or an exit event. Yeah, I can start defining this data structure just a little bit. So this is the thing. Before I go for a dinner break, what I'm going to do is organize this into a separate code file, because I think we've gotten to the point where I'm ready to do that. Fored input simulation.h. Look at that, 2014. What a fucking trip. Alright. Nope, it's March 2nd, right? Yeah. And this is the input simulation data declarations. I'm also, if you're still there, Karifa, I'm also totally the person who does totally crazy. I don't do the crazy macro stuff as much as you do, but I go just way over the top when it comes to generating code from from a meta program. Right, I definitely do a lot of that. So another thing I do is like I pre-bake all my shaders into strings that I can load, so that I don't have to do the thing Casey does on Handmade Hero, where where the code for my shader is a string in the code file. But I also don't have to do the thing that a lot of people do, where you load your files at runtime, because I'm just taking the GLSL file and baking it into a string at compile time. But I go farther than that in most of my engine setups. I also parse all the shaders, find all of the attributes and uniforms, and create structs for them that allow me to auto-generate the code that binds all the locations for attributes and uniforms. And then I take it another step farther than that when I create a program that allows me to define which shader files get combined together into shader programs, so that the code that generates the shader program linking stuff is auto-generated from a list that's just like, here are the shader programs, here's the name of each program, here's the files that are bound into that program. And if that wasn't enough to make shaders more usable, the final thing I do is I also build a separate program from my main program, whose entire purpose is to compile the shaders using the same OpenGL context setup that my main program uses, because it uses the same code path to initialize a window and a context as the actual program does. But once I've initialized that window and that context, I go ahead and build the shaders, and I report out the shader errors, and I link up the shader errors to their correct files, so that I have like a jump to error thing that works correctly for shader code. That takes an enormous amount of time to implement, and it's totally nuts. Like, it's almost certainly not a good way to spend a week, or like, it's almost certainly not a good way to spend 1 week of upfront implementation plus another week spread out like over the course of like a year to work out all the kinks in it. I don't know. Did that pay off to do that kind of stuff in the times when I did it? I don't know. But I like to do crazy stuff. Just not macros, because partly because the hash is it's like awkward to type, you know? Alright, so there we go. I've separated out into extra code files. Yep, we're still testing that same bug. It's not gone. And you know what, Karifa? I've been thinking about releasing that. I did a game engine with this feature, and it was the best version of that I've ever done. And I'm thinking of just open sourcing that, like public domain STB style, because when I started at Rad, I kind of wanted to keep using it, and I didn't have the code at the time because it wasn't posted online. Um, So I was like, do I implement all this again? And I just said no, and I went ahead and made the minimal thing, which just bakes the shader into a header, and that's it. Doesn't do any of the parsing and stuff that I normally do. And uh, it's not a big deal because I'm not doing very shader-heavy stuff at Rad. Uh, but man, it would be nice if I could just pull that down anywhere and have it working. So I might make that a little open source project that I just post somewhere soon. But on the other hand, I have a lot of other stuff I want to work on, and I don't want to take on the responsibility of maintaining that thing. So it's always scary to post things that people might actually try to use. Not scary as in I don't want to be embarrassed if there's a bug or something. Scary as in I don't want to have to fix it. There's definitely a bug in there somewhere. Plus, it's not super flexible. You'd have to manhandle it to make it work for particular things, like it doesn't know about GLSL versions very well. It doesn't totally understand those. So you kind of have to force it by just hacking it into the code, the version you want. Anyway, I'm going to wrap up the stream for now. I will do a third installment of 4coder Friday after I've had more grub. See you guys later. Bye-bye.